There you are, man.
I'm sorry.
I saw that too. That was like, that's my mom doesn't sleep. Like, she's like,
This is where I
yeah.
Hello everyone and welcome to Bishop's University Case Competition and Conference. Our next speaker is Zita Cobb, the CEO and founder of SureFast Foundation. Zita is an international influencer on how businesses can fuel innovative social change. So just a little bit about Zita. She was born in Newfoundland and then moved to Ontario for her school. She became an industry exec in the high-tech industry and then has moved on and moved back home to work on some projects that she'll talk about today. Thank you, Zita, for Skyping and to be with us. Please, take it away.
Okay, hi everybody. Can you hear me well enough?
Yeah.
Okay. What just happened?
Oh, it just got a little bit loud.
Okay. So Peter, you said we have about 40 minutes, maybe?
Yeah, about that.
Okay. And so I have a PowerPoint presentation. You know, I'm from the business world, so life began with PowerPoint. And so before I do that, does anybody know anything at all about our projects on a place called Fogo Island? Never heard of them? Okay, good. I like that better. So I'm a Newfoundlander, you know, so Newfoundlanders, we tell things in stories. Everything is a story. So I'm going to kind of tell you the story of Fogo Island. Now, let me bring up the PowerPoint. And so, do you see that?
Not yet.
Oh, dear. Did you see it earlier, Peter?
Yes, I saw it earlier when you went to the green square.
Yep. Now, why is it not there now? Hang on. Do we need to go back to the green guy?
Yes, I guess so.
Isn't that the strangest thing? Now, all of a sudden, everything has disappeared. My PowerPoint presentation is not there again. I think I have to rejoin you guys.
All right. So let's run that presentation again, and then we'll give this another go.
Yeah, so I have to sign out and come back, what I learned the last time. Hang on a second.
So Zita will be back in a second.
Hey, look, it's us.
Wow.
Okay, I do have my next
You're still not seeing it, right?
Still not getting it. Do you are you using it to the screen share?
Yeah, I am. I'm trying to. Hang on a second. But the only thing open is my PowerPoint on my desktop, and that is the one thing that I can't show you. Hang on, let me do this one more time. You know, Bill Morneau had these difficulties, so I don't feel so bad.
Yeah, you could eat. Oh,
Oh, hey.
it's us again.
I know, I was checking my makeup. That's great.
Aha, and there it is.
Yay!
Now, hopefully, when I go into presentation mode, I'll still have you. So, you still see it?
Yep, we still have.
Okay, so we're going to go faster. So I'm going to talk about an island that's off the northeast coast of Newfoundland. But before I do that, I want to start by saying, and I think you all know this, but we all live together, all of us, on a planet that's on fire. I think there are about 50 million people that are on the run. I don't think I need to tell anybody about all of the challenges of the environment and inequalities and all of these things. So I think we're all in a place that we realize that what we've been doing is probably not going to work. And it isn't working. In fact, it's doing quite the opposite. And so I'm going to talk about a little island that's 300 square kilometers. And that little island is a good proxy, I would argue, for a small planet. And so, as Peter said, my career was in business. I grew up on this little island. It's called Fogo Island, F-O-G-O. Fogo is the Portuguese word for fire. And my career was in business. I was in the technology world. I'm a finance person, and I'm a business person by instinct. So I want to say that at the beginning, because what I'm really interested in is a new way of doing business. So every time I say Fogo Island, I hope that you think about a place that means something to you. And I hope that you get up every morning with, something in your heart that has to do with place. And so one of the smartest people that ever lived was a man named E.F. Schumacher, and he wrote a number of books, but two that are notable and to what I'm going to talk about. One is called Small is Beautiful, and the other one is called The Guide for the Perplexed. And they're both really short reads. And so he, in one of those two books, I can't recall which one, he said, every person should get up in the morning, look at the world, and try to see it as whole. And his thesis was, if we all got up in the morning and saw the world as whole, that would change everything in the way we conducted ourselves. And so really, I think this isn't about Fogo Island, it's about the whole idea of human community. Another fellow whose work is hard to find because he wrote mostly in Korean, Dr. Gil-chin Lim, he was an urban planner. And he said, of course, globalization, we're not going to go backwards, and nobody wants to go backwards. But what we have to figure out how to do is to create a global network of intensely local places. So in the beginning of my presentation, there are going to be a few slides like this that are kind of about philosophy, and then I will get down to the more businessy things, but we kind of have to start with the ideas. Reductionism. I don't think you'll find many books written on reductionism, but I think that that's the ideology, the destructive ideology that has caused us as business people to do some things that are befouling our own nests. So reductionism is simply when we look at something, whether it's a person or a thing, and we reduce it down to something that we can instrumentalize. So for example, looking at a person and instead of seeing them as whole with pains and aches and dreams and a history and a future. We just see them as a consumer. That's reductionism at its most destructive. And so Schumacher was an anti-reductionist, so he was a whole thinker. And these are two of his really important sentences. Nature and culture are the two great garments of human life, and business and technology are the two great tools that can and should serve them. I have never met somebody that disagreed with this, but I've met lots of people that use business as master and not business as servant. And so this concept of sacred capital, maybe this has come up in your business studies. When I studied business, that was 30 years ago, nobody was talking about sacred capital. And when we said capital, we generally meant money. But this concept of sacred capital is best explained in a book by a fellow named Charles Eisenstein called Sacred Economics. It's a monster tome. The whole middle of it is sort of new agey, so you could probably skip that, but it's worth reading the beginning and the end of it. And so, of course, something like cultural capital or social capital or natural capital, the essence of something being sacred has nothing to do with spirituality. It has to do with something that has emerged out of a very unique set of circumstances and, if destroyed, cannot be replaced or easily repaired. And so all of these things, and you could add all kinds of other types of capital. People do talk about spiritual capital. And then there's money. And I think it's a really exciting time for you to be studying business and coming out into the business world, because the big challenge we all are faced with now is finding the right relationship between money or economic capital, financial capital, and sacred capital. And I think we have it right. We have all the elements. We just have to turn it upside down so that we have economic capital as servant, not master. And, one of the many problems we have in the world is this problem of inequality. But we all know, I think, that one of the problems we do not have is a shortage of money. There's lots of money in the world. It's not always where it's needed. And the really scary thing about money is that it always demands a return. And much sacred capital has been destroyed or injured in financial capital's quest for return. I mean, how many bad strip malls have been built? How many bad subdivisions that are really not needed, for example? So, but I think that's the crux of the problem. So a little bit about Fogo Island. So there we are, we're at 49 degrees latitude off the northeast coast of Newfoundland. There it is. I actually met Chris Hadfield, the astronaut. He said, Newfoundland is the most beautiful from outer space of all of the places. So there it is. And there's Fogo Island a little up closer. So we European people have lived on Fogo Island since the 1600s. And it was, and before that, the Beothuk people, they never overwintered there, but they fished there. And John Cabot, who was looking for India in 1497, found Newfoundland. And he wrote back to the King of England and apparently said, the fish are so plenty, they stay the progress of my ship. So I'm an 8th generation Fogo Islander, and I grew up at a place called Jobat's Arm. You can see it at the top there. And my father was a fisherman, and his father was a fisherman, and that is what has happened on Fogo Island for 400 years. I'll give you a sense of our sacred capital. All of this is sacred. And this is to give you a sense of the traditional architecture of the island, because it's really important to the business story that I want to share with you. And colonies of different kinds of seabirds. These ones happen to be puffins, and whales, of course. And because we are fishing people, we are super good at building wooden boats. And actually, we have a race in the summer, a rowing race. Actually, this photograph was taken during the race. So you can come and participate in our race. There's a cash prize, and it's a lot of fun. You're not going to win, I can tell you that right now. Just look at the shoulders on these guys. And so we have 7 seasons on Fogo Island. And, talk about reductionist thinking. When I grew up, I am the first generation really on the island that people generally could read and write. Like, my parents couldn't read and write. It wasn't necessary. And when we sort of started to get tangled up with the mainland, my father heard that people talked about 4 seasons. He thought it was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. And so when we tried to count the seasons on Fogo Island, we got at least 16, but we've settled on 7. And it's just a little example of, there aren't 4 seasons because somebody in New England says there are 4 seasons. And so we have many herds of caribou on the island that we share it with. This is what it's like at home now. This is the pack ice that comes down. So Fogo Island is located in the Labrador Current, which means, and it's a very powerful south-going cold current that comes from Greenland and brings the pack ice with it this time of year, and seals, of course, as well. And then the icebergs come like this. So we've seen our first iceberg of the season, which is way too early to be seeing icebergs. So that's a bit of a frightening thing. And another bit of the architecture. So if you've seen any images of the inn, and if you haven't, I'm going to show you some, you will understand, seeing this as a fishing stage, the relationship between this building, which is, I think, about 300 years old, and the inn that we built. And I grew up like this. We all grew up feral. And you can be sure that those kids know when the tide's coming in. And they don't, they just know it. They know it in their bones. They don't have to look it up. And this is one of the communities on the island that's all Irish. This is the Irish community of Tilting. And so our lives and our culture and our sense of ourselves has really been derived from this fish. This is a North Atlantic cod. The humble fish that changed the world is a tagline of a book called Cod, written by Mark Kurlansky. And so this is what Cabot found in 1497. And this is the way we fished for 350 years. And these men, and my father fished like this, they would have built their own boats and made their own gear. And they were inshore fishing people, meaning that they only went out about 5 miles. You could still see the land. They're brilliant coastal navigators, but we never went far offshore. And these buildings are a part of that inshore fishery. And then this happened. So the first one of these factory draggers was built in Scotland in the late 50s. And it took 30 years, and only 30 years, to bring the cod, which has sustained us for 350 years, to the brink of ecological extinction. And so when I was 10 years old, everything that we knew, our entire culture was threatened, and our ability to stay on our island was threatened because there were just no more fish. We could see these draggers, and they were from every country on earth, pressing up against our shores day and night, fishing day and night. And to us, this made no sense. Like, why on earth, who in their right mind would fish day and night and not expect that the fish are going to run out? And so it was a very painful time. And in all around Newfoundland, this was a problem. And so Joey Smallwood was the then premier of Newfoundland, and he introduced this act in the House of Assembly to resettle all of these tiny little communities that had been there for 400 years. And our little island was one of those. And this particular scene here on the screen is not from Fogo Island. It's from Placentia Bay, which is not that far from us. People had to move. And in many cases, they took their homes with them. Like in this case, they're floating their home to some other place. Now, you couldn't always take your home if you were going far inland. And this was a tragedy that really continues to play out. And of course, this kind of thing is playing out, as you probably know, around the world. I mean, this is not a uniquely Newfoundland problem or a uniquely Canadian problem. All around the world, we're experiencing a disintegration of small places. In any event, on Fogo Island, we did not get resettled because of this man who lives in Montreal to this day. That's Colin Lowe. He's a filmmaker. And at the time, he was a young filmmaker with the National Film Board. And the man in the inset was at the university, Memorial University in St. John's. And together they started something which was, at this point, if you can imagine, we have 10 little communities on Fogo Island. We didn't know each other. I mean, I grew up in Jobat's Arm. I'd never been to Tilting, which was 5 kilometers away, because we didn't have cars and there was no reason to go to Tilting. So even though we'd been there for centuries, we had no history of collaborating with each other and no easy way of communicating. And so this film process they started, which is now called a Fogo process. If you study film, you will study that. Basically used film, small cameras, not like the one, he actually was one of the inventors of IMAX, which is what this picture is from. But they had small cameras and they would give it to people to take the cameras home and to film the conversations and what was happening that was relevant to finding a new path. And there's something about art, in this case, film, that short circuits our brains. Like, you should not trust your brain too much, because brains are designed to manage risk, right? And so our brains are really good at knowing when there's a threat, and we're really good at evaluating maybe this and maybe that, but we don't make decisions with our brains. We make decisions with something else, some other part of our body. We'll say our heart or our gut or something. And so art, of course, short circuits our brains, which has a tendency to be mistrustful and engages a more sort of whole side of our humanity. And so this whole Fogo process, this is one of the films, they're all online. It brought Fogo Islanders together in a really powerful way. And if you Google, go to the NFB and Google Fogo process, you'll find these films. And if you're ever having a bad day, watch this one. The Children of Fogo Island is like 17 minutes and 30 seconds of pure joy. In any event, what happened with us is that all of these little tiny communities came together, and each fisherman put in $1 or something, and they started a co-op. Now, a co-op or a cooperative is a brilliant way to allow a community to own a business. And this is one of the things I want you to be to take away from what I'm saying is businesses don't have to just belong to entrepreneurs, to me or to you. They can actually belong to businesses, and there are very innovative business models that allow that to happen. So in the case of Fogo Island, so this is our new fishery. All of our fish plants in our fishery is owned by this cooperative. And you know, like every business model, it's got its challenges, because sometimes, you know, governance isn't what it should be, or people don't understand what's the difference between being a fisherman, being a shareholder, or being a board member. But nonetheless, cooperatives have their place. And of course, they've been around for a long time in the agricultural world. So we managed on Fogo Island to hold on. And we adapted to the midshore fishery, which means we have to go further out. We built slightly bigger boats. Now we fish for crab and shrimp, because, as I mentioned, we're in the Labrador Current, where all the pack ice comes down. This is a scene from last year's crab fishery. Our fishermen on the northeast coast of Newfoundland have to go through pack ice to even start fishing. So it's a pretty hazardous way to make a living. And so I finished high school on Fogo Island in 1975, and Lambert Cobb was my father. And he was always very clear to make sure we as kids understood that whatever happened, we didn't know why someone would take all the fish. But whatever happened, he said, you remember, it wasn't a fish that let us down. And so he died never really understanding why that happened, what did let us down. So I studied business because I wanted to understand what system these ships were operating in that would make such dreadful decisions. And so this is what I learned. Everything I learned in business school, I can sum up in a cauliflower. Now, maybe you people are learning different things. A cauliflower is basically a fractal, right? It's a pattern that repeats. And Fogo Island is a tiny floret in that cauliflower. Toronto was a bigger floret, but we are all joined by the connective tissue, which is the stem, which is supposed to bring nutrition to the florets. And our business systems, our distribution systems, our governance systems, they are all part of that connective tissue of the stem. And when the stem starts to optimize for its own well-being at the expense of the florets, well, then florets die. And, you know, it's like the canary in the mine story, right? The little communities are going to suffer first. But, you know, I have a brother who lives at Yonge and Eglinton in Toronto, and I always tell him, Tony, nothing is going to happen on Fogo Island that will not eventually happen in Toronto, because if we're doing something in our systems, in our business systems or regulatory systems that is not good for community, it will show up first in small places. So there you go. That's the cauliflower story. So Fogo Island hung on, but you know, the fishery has been a really, truly difficult business for 400 years. It's difficult. And as we sit here today, off the coast of Canada, out in the ocean, there is an illegal fishery that is so destructive, that is still going on. It would take your breath away to know. So my only plea to you out of this is, before you buy fish and eat fish, make sure you know where it came from, because much of it is caught illegally in the Bering Sea, landed in Europe, shipped to China, processed and sent back. So careful with your fish. So I was in the technology world. I was the CFO of a company called JDS Uniphase, and I retired in 2001. And I moved home a few years later. And when I'd always been going home, Newfoundlanders always go home. I realized that home was much less than it used to be, and it was really difficult for young people to stay. So at our peak on the island, we were 6,000 people, and now we're 2,706. So we're less than half of our peak population. So with my brothers, I wanted to do something to put another leg on the economy, and to do it in a way, you know, that was very complementary to the fishery, which is still our most important business. And of course, we wanted to do something that was business minded. We wanted, of course, to see the world as whole and to look at Fogo Island as a whole. And we wanted to work with our sacred capital in a way that fortified it, didn't, and not instrumentalized it. And of course, we wanted to use business as a servant of place. So we started by making a charity, a charitable foundation called Shorefast. I'm not all that interested in charity. I mean, of course, it's an important thing, but what I'm super interested in is using charitable funds in business-minded ways. And when we started 10 years ago, this concept of social business was really brand new. But now I think it's a kind of a movement. And we did something called ABCD, Asset-Based Community Development, which is basically to ask and answer a set of questions. What do we have? What do we know? What do we love? What do we miss? And what can we do about it? Because I don't know how many of you are from small places or even big places, but when things start to go wrong, you know, if the bottom falls out of the economy, it very quickly becomes, you know, that young people leave and you only have old people left and nobody knows how to do anything. We don't know how to participate in the, you know, in the modern world. We don't know how to join a Google Hangout, whatever, you know, it becomes very difficult to focus on the positive and very easy to spiral with the negative. So this process of asking and answering these questions keeps you, you know, focused on what you have. I don't think we have enough time to talk about David Foster Wallace. Let's skip past him. And so what we decided to do were four things. We decided to start with art because we believe in art as a way of knowing, as a way of belonging, as a part of the fabric, and should be a part of the fabric of all of our lives. And art is the best antidote that I know to reductionist thinking, because it helps you live in the questions a little bit longer. I think one of the real dangers in the business world is that we as business people don't like uncertainty, and the world's filled up with uncertainty. And we want things to be clearer than they really are. And sometimes we rush into decisions because we don't like to be indecisive in the business world. We rush to a decision which turns out to be a wrong one. We move too fast. And sometimes as we've moved on down the wrong path, the right answer is trying to emerge just behind us. Art helps us not do that. We built a little inn, and that inn is sort of the economic engine of the island, along with the fishery. We have a business fund, which is modeled after the Grameen Bank, which of course Mohammed Yunus won the Nobel Prize for. And we have a whole set of initiatives that have to do with a better relationship with the ocean, because, you know, the cod are coming back, and we get a second chance at that. And you don't always get a second chance. And these are the things we call out, that we steer by every day, that place itself has intrinsic value. I want to distinguish between something that has economic value and something that has intrinsic value. Sometimes things that have intrinsic value also have economic value, but no matter whether it does or it doesn't, it's like love. Does love have economic value or beauty? Maybe it does and maybe it doesn't, but we need to protect it with all of our might. And so place has intrinsic value. Ways of knowing, that we needed to be respectful of all of the human ways of knowing. This man is from the community of Tilting. He's a great boat builder. I don't think Frank reads or writes. So if we want to know what that man thinks, shame on us if all we can do is send him an email. You know, it's our job to engage with people in the way that they want to express. Life is a rhythm of opposites. And if you're going to get involved in community development, remember that, because you often find yourself in things that seem like contradictions, but you just steer through them. It's a paradox, it's not a contradiction. Community is, of course, the basic building block of human life. And by that, I don't mean like, you know, if I have a Subaru and you have a Subaru, we're part of the Subaru community. I think in some ways we've used that word in such terrible ways, we've lost touch with what it means. What it really means is we have a shared fate, F-A-T-E, and we know it. Art is a way of asking and belonging, and we talked about that, and the power of design. We have been building little wooden houses on Fogo Island for 400 years. Nobody noticed. Then we started to build these artist studios for our artist residency program, and everybody noticed, including Apple, who actually stole one of our images, which I'll share with you. I believe all businesses have to be not just for profit. I'm not a big believer in the modern incarnation of corporate social responsibility because I think most of it is BS. I think that responsibility to community and responsibility to humans and then responsibility to ecology and to the whole needs to be a part of the fabric of the business and how it thinks. And I mean, a little example of this is a good business is a business that pays its employees as much as it possibly can afford. Whereas I would argue a bad business pays them as little as they can get away with. And so I've seen so much in my lifetime of people who wear suits during the day, who don't practice good business, go home and change into ball gowns and tuxedos at night to become philanthropic heroes to solve the problems that really perhaps they created during their day jobs. So every business needs, and I actually think that the businesses that don't become not just for profits won't survive anyway. So this is social enterprise. It's where these two worlds meet. And our inn is a social enterprise. So it is owned by the charity, and any surpluses from the inn go back to the charity and stay in the community. So there's no private gain in any of the businesses we've started. Of course, what we had to figure out is how to stitch ourselves into the fabric of the bigger world. We're just a little patch on the Canadian quilt. And so this is some of the stuff we did. We built this as our first artist studio. It's made of wood. It's built by our local carpenters. It just has a contemporary design. And even though little places are traditional, that doesn't mean we want to live, this is an artist, our first artist in residence, doesn't mean we want to live in a museum. And so rural people are also contemporary people. And rural cultures have something to add to the contemporary dialogue. This is the Tower Studio. These are just workspaces for artists. This is Kate Newby from New Zealand. It's an international artist residence program. The Caribou took a very long time to decide if they liked the studio. They didn't used to go there when it first went up. This is the only one that's not on the ocean. That's like the writer's studio. And that's actually the architect, Todd Saunders, in a big nor'easter, as we call these big storms. Now you get a sense of the harshness of the climate there. Kate again. And so this image, when Apple launched their iPhone 5, which was probably 300 years ago now, they used this image to promote the iPhone 5. Now, if you want to talk about poor corporate behavior, they neither asked our permission or informed us in advance. And we found out because our website crashed. So there's we've written them 10,000 letters. I'm sure one day I'll write back. The artists don't live in those studios. If you used to be 6,000 people and now you're 2,706, well, that means you have a lot of houses that need a lot of love. So we restored some of the traditional homes and artists live in them. And so now you get a sense of the old and the new. That old building without the new one, I think if you saw that, your heart would feel pain for the people who lived there and whose lives were maybe amounted to nothing. The new one, without the old one, would just be some young architect's idea of beauty. Who cares? I think architecture, great architecture, needs to carry time. And it can carry the past, and it can make you feel the presence of time. I mean, when you drive down, one of these streets with a box store after box store after box store, I mean, there are two reasons I think that makes us sad, and I think it universally makes us sad. One reason is, of course, is this plague of sameness. And the other reason is there's an absence of time. You don't feel time there. And so this is the inn we built. And it, same architect, also built locally, mostly made of wood with a steel frame construction, 29 rooms. It is built in a way that probably more than any other building in Canada is responsive to the landscape and the place that it's in. And it's made by local people. We've won just about every possible award that you can win. The most recent one was we were chosen by the Telegraph in London as one of the 50 greatest hotels in the world. And none of us had ever done anything like this before. So this is the inn. And I think I said earlier, the world is suffering from a plague of sameness. Well, all of the images that I showed you earlier and after this are from Fogo Island, except this next one is not. And I put this up to ask the question, why on earth do we build this kind of stuff? Because it destroys communities, it destroys joy. And I think it's because our brains, our business brains, over-focus on things we can measure. And we can't measure beauty. The payback period on something like this is certainly less than 10 years. And so the good news about it is, of course, it's not going to last more than 20 years. And so we get to do it again. I don't actually agree with Amazon that we don't need shops. I think we do need shops. Human beings need to see each other in public spaces. And so when we do it again, and if you ever in your life have anything to do with building something, think about your civic duty to beauty and try and work with a payback period that's 100 years or more. So this is the end. It's like an X plan. This is one of those other power. My father never thought any weather was bad. He used to say, we have soft weather and we have strong weather. So there you go, that's strong weather. The market that we are in is called geotourism. I'm sure you know and have heard of the destruction that's been caused around the world by mass tourism. Geotourism is a combination of cultural tourism and ecotourism that is responsive to and optimizes for the well-being of people in place. Little tour around the inn. Has a sauna, all made with Newfoundland wood because our climate invites it. We have a library, an art gallery, of course, that is in a partnership with the Fogo Island Arts Program. A theater, which is a partnership with the National Film Board of Canada, because we have such a long history with them, it just reinforces our relationship. That's the dining room. The inn is kind of like a ship. It's 300 feet long and 30 feet wide. And if a ship has a prow, the dining room is the prow of our ship. I'm a huge fan of this economist, Tim Jackson. He wrote many books, but the most important one, I think, is called Prosperity Without Growth. And I will read this because it's super important. Avoiding the scourge of unemployment may have less to do with chasing after growth and more to do with building an economy of care, craft, and culture. And that's exactly what we've tried to do. Now, when the inn was designed and we started building it, then we had to ask the question, well, what are we going to put in it? What kind of beds, what kind of tables and chairs? And so we decided, because we have a long culture of making things ourselves, to make it ourselves. People like this woman can make anything out of textiles. And we have a long history with furniture. This is some of the traditional furniture of Fogo Island and Newfoundland. Anybody who can build a boat can build a chair. And so we invited these young designers to come from away. Most of them came from Europe, and they worked along. Well, the woman seated on my right is Elaine Fortem from Montreal. She designed what is arguably the rock star of the furniture collection. They came and went in residencies. There's Elaine working on her chair. And this beautiful collaboration between traditional craftspeople and contemporary designers has resulted in the most amazing furniture. It's a very typical meeting. And so business doesn't have to get done in boardrooms. Business can get done in communities. So these are some of the objects that were designed and built. All of these are built on the island. And so you can imagine that all of this has led to a business. And by the way, we should expect a lot from a chair. We shouldn't accept any objects in our lives that are anonymous. We should know where they came from, what materials they were made with, out of what relationship this chair emerged, because through an object, you are placed in a relationship with the maker and with where it came from, even if you don't know them personally. And so a little sense of the inn, people refer to it as handmade modern. Even the wallpaper was designed for the inn. And so little story about hangers. We never intended to make hangers. And the way we set about doing this was, if we could make something ourselves or we have a history with it, we would make it ourselves. Otherwise, we'd buy it from Newfoundland or Canada or the US or Europe. But we had a very strict rule. We would never buy something from places that didn't have basic labor laws and basic environmental protection laws. So we couldn't find hangars. I absolutely could not find hangars. We had no choice but to make them ourselves, which we did. And so we now find ourselves in the hanger business. And so in many ways, we've kind of backed ourselves into these businesses. Outdoor furniture. There's a book about the furniture of the inn now. And there's a website. It's called Fogo Island Shop, fogoislandshop.ca. And so you can go there and browse about. And if it has a tagline, I think the tagline will be new ways with old things. But every time somebody buys a piece of furniture, that's more employment on the island. There are these two dogs live at the inn. The black one is a classic Newfoundland, and the black and white guy is a Landseer. They are the traditional dogs of Newfoundland. So talk about food a little bit. When we opened, we were on Root's list of the best restaurants in Canada. We work with all local produce. There's a good sized codfish. See, they're coming back. All local berries. We have 26 kinds of edible berries on the island. It's a very rocky island, but the soil's very rich. These are the things that Chef Murray works with. So we don't work with things we have to bring from really far away. That's our Chef Murray McDonald, picking, I think that's oyster leaves. Lots of foraging goes on. We do lots of cooking outside. The word sustainability, I struggle with that word. I hate to use it because it's so overused and is in danger of losing its meaning. But I've always loved this sentence, that an acceptance of precariousness is a prerequisite to permanence. Little idea to leave you with, because I'm going to wrap up now. In my lifetime, not yours, we got this, food labeling. So you can get up in the morning and look at, the box of cereal sitting in front of you and decide whether you're going to have a second bowl of something. Now, we chose to put tea here. I'm not sure why. We're Newfoundlanders. We drink a lot of tea. But this idea can be adapted, and we have adapted it to do this. So all of the things we sell, and you'll see this on the Fogo Island Shop website, you'll see it in the way we run our inn. We tell you where the money goes. So imagine if every single thing that you purchase, whether it's a t-shirt or a bag, doesn't matter what it is, has a little tag like this. And in this case, we're looking at a dining chair. And so it just tells you that 45% of the money you just paid for that chair goes into labor, 8% into direct materials, how much overhead. It just breaks it all down. It's very doable. Now, in the social business world, we refer to profits as surpluses. And so a 15% surplus is built into the pricing of our chair. Profit is not a bad thing. Too much of it, though, too much of it is a bad thing, because what too much of it tells us is that there's not enough sharing going on. And then this label also tells you where geographically the money went. So 70% of what was spent on that chair stays on Fogo Island. So I think as consumers, well, we know as consumers, we have almost as much power as we have as voters. And we need more information to be better consumers. And so this is something I'd like to see rolled out everywhere, just like food labeling. So just wrapping up, we are all, each and every one of us, responsible for the ongoing creation of our communities. We're born into communities. We belong to communities. And what matters is what we do. And the super happy news is that everything that everyone does matters. And a little poem from a New Zealand poet, which I think sums up the fate and the challenge of a little community, and maybe the fate and the challenge of an individual person. The art of walking upright is the art of using both feet. One is for holding on, and one is for reaching out. And that's what we're trying to do on Fogo Island, and we use business to do it. So, are you all still there?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can make this go away so I can see you. Now, Peter, I don't know what our talk. You're all still there. Wait a minute, I should have counted you before I started. I don't know how much time we have left, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes, we have about 10 minutes now for questions. If anyone has any, please feel free. You can come down and ask them. Any questions? All right.
How's it going?
Hello, hello.
Hi, so just curious, to put it in perspective, I thought that the hangers were pretty interesting. So if you were to, let's say, sell a hanger, approximately like how much would that go for? And then that can kind of put into perspective everything else of the furniture.
Yes, the hangar is, I have to go look it up. Are you online there? Go to the Fogo Island shop and look it up. I think the hangar it's a very expensive hangar because we make them one by one by one. If I had to guess, I think it's around $50, but I'm not sure. Yeah. As one woman who asked her son, he said, "What do you want for Christmas?" She said, "I want 10 hangers from the Fogo Island shop." So if it's 50, so let's say that was $500, let's say. And she said, because, I don't need 200 dresses. I need 10.
So we'll update, the hangers are each $65 on the Fogo Island shop.
Thank you.
Hi, I was wondering how the sort of prescription that you've had on Fogo Island could be sort of implemented into northern Canada and sort of the Inuit and Native communities up there.
Yes, that's something we think about all the time because I don't know if you followed the terrible situation in La Loche with the shooting in La Loche. La Loche actually means barbet. And a barbet is a freshwater cod. So we feel really connected again to all of these small communities. I think the most important thing that we've done that is very transferable to any community, big or small, is this process of ABCD. To start with who are we? Where are we? What do we know? What's our history? What can we do? What do we love? And how can we make something of it? And of course, governments need to work with small communities as well. And once communities come together to create, and that's why I think getting communities to start to understand that they can own businesses. They don't just need to sit there and wait for someone to come from away and start a business. They can actually do that themselves because that's the challenge, is to figure out how to participate in the global economy. And governments have a role around the infrastructure, whether it's communications infrastructure or transportation infrastructure, to help put the foundations down that people can then build on. But I mean, as long as there are people who love a community, that community has potential. It's just, I think, and maybe it's the way we teach business as well. Business always feels like something that belongs to, a special group of people, as opposed to every single citizen. So I think it's getting that kind of thinking activated in small places. I mean, entrepreneurs are everywhere. They just sometimes don't know they're entrepreneurs.
Do we have any other questions? All right, I have a question for you, Zita. So moving on from our talk today and like a week from now, 2 weeks from now, next year when we've graduated, what do you think that we should take in our personal and business lives from this talk and apply it to what we do and how we live?
I think what you're acquiring a set of skills, which are tools. You will, well, maybe not all of you, because some of you may not decide to stay in so-called business world, but before you're a business person, you're a person, you're a human being. And you need to use your skills, and I think it will make for stronger businesses, use your skills to fortify or reinforce the well-being of the communities that you live in. I mean, I was in Berlin recently and gave a talk, and somebody said, how would you build an inn if you were going to build an inn in Berlin? Or is this just a small community approach? I said, absolutely not. If I was going to build an inn in Berlin, I would, first of all, say, well, what's the site we're building it on? What's the geology of this site? Let's understand it really deeply. And who lived here before us? Who lived and died here? And who are our neighbors? And what do they do? And, maybe there are, let's define my community. Even in a city like Berlin, which is a huge sprawling city, there are communities within that city. And my definition of a community is the distance that a human being can walk in one day. And so let's mark out our community. And we're going to build an inn. Let's understand if there are other restaurants here, we better collaborate with those people because you wouldn't want to hurt them. And maybe what I'm doing here in my inn can help your restaurant. Maybe there's someone here who makes furniture. Maybe there's someone here who has this skill or that skill. But let's use the opportunity of creating an inn, whether it's in Berlin or Fogo Island, to knit together all the elements of the community you're joining. And that's how you use business to make stronger communities and stronger alliances. And you then are in relationship with that community. You're always in relationship with the past, whether you realize it or not. And if you pay very close attention to the natural world that you live in, even in an urban world, try to keep the natural close to you, it makes for a stronger business and a business that's giving more than it's taking.
All right.
Okay.
Any other questions? Any other questions? No? Well, thank you for Skyping in with us today, Zita.
Thank you. Good luck with your studies.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
That was amazing.